Welcome to the Lead, Learn, Thrive podcast by Raffa. This show is a series of conversations with interesting nonprofit and private sector leaders and those who help them do more. You will hear candid and insightful interviews that get to the heart of what makes great organizations thrive and makes impact possible.
Hi, this is Karen Schuler, this afternoon's host for the Lead, Learn, Thrive podcast. We are welcoming Tony Cancelosi, the president and CEO of the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, this afternoon. Tony, welcome, and thank you for being here with us.
It's my pleasure to be back together with you again.
Yes. Tony and I have had the opportunity to talk on two earlier podcasts. We started talking about his work as the CEO of the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. It was his first time in a CEO position for a nonprofit, following a long legacy of entrepreneurial CEO positions. And then we spoke about organizational sustainability. This afternoon, we're going to be looking at leadership effectiveness, and particularly how leaders remain effective and vital and vibrant to their organizations over time. So Tony, I thought if you could start us off. You started at Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind almost 12 years ago, and I was wondering if you could share with us some of the early successes you had in terms of leadership effectiveness and helping to advance the organization early in your career as their CEO.
I think we start off when you have to get into an organization to identify what are the things that you have to fix, which is the most important part. So it might not be a total success that you've achieved something when you have to fix it. But fixing things are vital when you first get into an organization. I remember when I first got to Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, one of the things I did was I first looked at all the board minutes for about 3-4 years to try to understand how the board was functioning as an organization, within the organization as the board, to see what kind of decisions they had to make, what kind of decisions they did not make. So that gave me kind of a view of what I had to look forward to in dealing with board members at that point in time. So that gave me a feel for what are the things that we had to change. And as time went on, it was clear that boards can be together too long, just like a CEO can be there too long. And in some cases, not only do they lose some of their effectiveness, but also what would their visions be for the next 5 years? So if you've been on a board or if you've been a CEO for a long, long time, how effective are you from the day you started to the day where you've been there 15 years or 14 years, or I'll even say 12 years. Okay. So the achievements primarily were two things. One, we had an obligation to the visually impaired and blind community not to do away with any programs that had to do with their independence. That was clearly something that we had to make sure that we could not cut this program or cut that program in order for us to save money or not go out of business.
Right.
But at the same time, we had to find ways to fund those projects. So we kept, to this day, I don't think we've ever canceled any service that we provide to our present clients that for independent living skills, orientation, mobility. Today we have a transition program for young adults. We have summer camp. We had summer camp then. But more importantly, it was more the independent skills that we maintained.
And as you looked at those programs early on in your time at Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, did you think about ways to reposition those programs? I know often when CEOs are new to organizations, they find that the mission and the heart of the organization is quite powerful, but sometimes the tactics to achieve that mission may be out of dated or not quite as streamlined.
That's absolutely true. And coming from the for-profit community where the bottom line and shareholders value, all the things that we think of for the corporate world and profitability, does come into effect. I think most CEOs that come into a nonprofit, the mistake they make is they try to change everything at one time without getting to know what are the essentials within the organization that have to be looked at in order for you to take it to the next step. So it's so important that you analyze that first, and then you start building from there. And it's almost like Legos. My granddaughter has Legos, and she can build virtually anything. You give her, she's 7 years old, and you give her this box. She drops all these pieces out, and within an hour, she's got it all together. And I'm going, I could have never done that when I was 7 years old. I mean, even today, I probably can't do it. So it's that kind of approach, is you throw the Legos out, and you take one at a time, and you start trying to build back to where you have to be. It's a building process that has to take place. And I think too often when you go in and you try to change everything at one time, you're going to lose the effectiveness of the people within the organization.
And we often hear that expression, taking an organization to the next level, and I think that is something that occurs over time, and as you said, sort of one piece at a time. If you think about the last 12 years at Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, is there a point at which you recognize that the organization had successfully advanced to the next level?
Again, when in the for-profit world, success is based on revenue, profit. When I got to Columbia Lighthouse, we looked at what were the essential programs that had growth potential that would not affect the services that we provide to the people, but give us a base to grow. And that was clearly the government contracting area, which I was very familiar with. So we took the charge to start growing the government contracting side, which really was a benefit to our community because it created jobs. And those jobs gave them a meaningful runway of at least 5 years in that government contract with more than minimum wage, double minimum wage. So that was one area that we could grow. But what it also did for us, it gave us a baseline of revenue to sustain us when all the other services that we're providing were not coming in. And in most cases, we were not being paid enough for those services, for like independent living skills, orientation, mobility. And even with our summer camp, we still had to raise money. So the government contracting side has grown almost to a $6 million business today.
Wow.
From virtually $1.5 million. So that gives us sustainability from a baseline. And all the other things that we're doing now, we've got better internal controls. We have now truly have identified people with the skills that are needed to serve the visually impaired and blind and the deaf-blind. We just hired a young woman to handle our deaf-blind program. She speaks 5, 6 different languages through the hands of individuals that are deaf.
Wow.
Now, that's amazing. And so we won a couple contracts for the deaf-blind community. So we're serving. So that's very significant. So looking at what we've had to build on, but also building what I call the image of Columbia Lighthouse. And as you're building image and you're trying to build a reputation, it's always not going to be exactly what you want, because there's always going to be something out there, individuals, whatever, that are not totally happy. And I think that in the nonprofit world, I think that exists on a regular basis to a degree, not all the time.
Right.
Because they have so many needs, and you're trying to fulfill all those needs at one time. And sometimes, we're not perfect, so we're not going to be able to do everything we possibly can at times. And sometimes we disappoint people.
Great. So you built the government contracting component as sort of a funding base. I mean, the program itself has integrity, but it's also helping to sustain other programmatic areas, and that's absolutely representative of taking the organization to the next level. What do you see on the horizon as some of the pivots or transformations that you think Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind needs to be thinking about or considering?
I think the most important thing right now that we've been looking at is with the aging population that we have, and with the increase of diabetes and obesity, diabetic retinopathy, and people in the aging process, they're going to lose a good chance of losing some of their sight, is what are we going to do to help them stay independent? And one of the things that we've been working on very strongly is assurance of accessibility for them through websites, through transportation, through every aspect of a restaurant or whatever, people in wheelchairs, museums. We are working with a museum here that really wants to work with us. They're very concerned about people with disabilities. They want them to come to their museum. So we're working with them right now to how we could help them make that museum accessible for people with disabilities. So accessibility is the next really serious growth area, because everyone will recognize the fact that accessibility is essential for us. So who would like to go onto a website and not be able to navigate and get frustrated and not be able to go to that restaurant or get that service or buy online? Okay? Because this aging population definitely has some kind of income to do that. And if they can't have that accessibility, restaurants are going to lose revenue, online services are going to lose revenue, banks are going to online services. So accessibility is like the government contracting side for us, because we're doing it for the government. And it's mandated. I think you're going to hear in the next year or two that all common websites have to be accessible for people with disabilities. That's the next generational thing.
And so as you think about that, and you think about being the leader of Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind and being an effective leader, how do you position yourself to help the organization be able to move in that direction and be highly responsive to that?
It all has to do with our infrastructure and our people. It has to be the people that we have now that are growing in their positions to replace me and replace others. So it's creating an infrastructure inside for growth. And that's pretty hard to do sometimes, because you have individuals that have the right skills, they have the right mission, they might have the same, good work ethic, and it's a question of whether they would like to step up to that plate. Not everybody wants to be the CEO. Not everybody wants to be an executive. But it all has to do with how you build and form the infrastructure of your organization for growth. But it all gets down to the people in the organization and how you're managing them and how you're seeing how they're going to elevate themselves. Because it's got to come from within to the top.
Great. And as you're looking at infrastructure, that's the people side, and then there's the policies and procedures and the financial side. How do you, as a leader, integrate all of those?
It's a matter of process. It really is. It comes from within. Mentioned earlier, I don't know how many organizations have a policy and procedure manual. We created one a couple years ago, and then we revamped it about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. We're going to look at it again. And by doing that process of bringing each senior director or direct reports who are responsible for a specific area of the business and lay out what is their policy in running their division and how are they running their division. What are the things they need? What are the things that they need to grow? Okay? So there's got to be an infrastructure from within that's going to give people that growth potential, but it's got to come down to policy and procedures.
So effectively, you're talking about almost recapitalizing Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, both in terms of people and policies.
That was my next comment. We are talking about recapitalizing. For the last couple of months now, we've had to look at our internal systems, internal controls. We just getting close to completing our audit. We seem to have a very good audit, a very good 990. But in the process of that, we talked about recapitalization. When people have recapitalization, they just think of money, but it's much more than that. It's reconstituting these policies and procedures that we talked about. It's more important about how do you take that recapitalization and look at the growth of that over the next 2 to 3 years, no more than 3 years. You look at all your finances, but more importantly, you look at your own people and say, can that person grow from where they are now to the next level and the next level? That's recapitalization. And that's what we're looking at. We're going to be looking at that very heavily in the next couple of months. Our board has already approved it, and it pertains to any kind of debt that we have. We got a nice balance sheet. But look at all the debt, look at anything, but it's about the people and how we recapitalize the organization. But that's exactly what we've been talking about.
And you and I had spoken before that one of the pieces that integrates with leadership effectiveness, and it relates to the recapitalizing, is an awareness and value for generation management, that's really part of leadership today.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about how you're looking at that at Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind.
It has a lot to do with our HR department. I think HR departments are going to change drastically in the sense of how we hire people and how we maintain the level of integrity and not secrecy, but secrecy in the sense of the individual themselves. Keeping that within the HR department. But HR is going to play a different role moving forward because that's going to be important. How do we vet these people out? How do we recruit? How do we get the people in the organization? And who do we recruit? That's going to be the real topic for us. And I think a lot of organizations, not just nonprofits, are going to go through that same transition because there is at least a 10 to 12 year difference in gap of different generations here.
Right.
So it's going to be really, I think, fascinating for HR departments to take on that challenge. But I think it's in the HR department that it's not, I'm not passing it along, but it's clearly their job to look at people that we are looking at to hire, but how do they fit into the organization?
Right. Well, clearly you pay a lot of attention to organizational effectiveness and mission impact and how to engage across the broader organization in advancing mission. As you're looking 5 years out, 6 years out, do you have any thoughts for our listeners in terms of how leaders maintain their effectiveness and stay sort of ahead of the curve?
It all has to do with communications to their senior staff, and from their senior staff to the senior staff. There's got to be this flow down and then a flow up of information, because we just can't, not only senior staff, but the boards cannot be kind of like it's our way or no way. It's got to have a lot of input, and that's why I keep going back to this policy and procedure process, because it gets it all out and everybody's got an open forum to present everything. So that's going to be, if we don't do that, the effectiveness of organizations are going to suffer, because we're going to be hiring people that might just only want a job and get there, and there's no commitment beyond that. Not saying that's wrong, but at the same time, in the nonprofit world, you need people that are committed.
Great. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I appreciate your talking about leadership effectiveness, everything from the early days in terms of fixing and then growing a piece of the mission through government contracting, keeping your eye on accessibility, which is sort of the look forward to the future, and how you sustain and advance your infrastructure for growth. All of those very, very important topics. You certainly have given our listeners a lot to think about. If listeners have questions, please look for the email in the podcast blog. We would welcome the opportunity to respond. And Tony, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening today. For more conversations in the Lead, Learn, Thrive series, and for additional information about the topics discussed in this episode, please visit raffa.com/podcast. That's RAFFA.com/podcast. The Raffa Learning Community is a resource that aims to connect, inspire, and empower you with the knowledge to do more. Let us know what you want to hear, and we will work to make it happen.